If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me I've got Josh. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a good holiday season so far. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, things are going kind of crazy for me here at the end of the year. I think I gave you the rundown of that last week. At least, I get a nice little break here to kind of recharge my batteries and move forward.
That is always nice. I hate when the holidays are going like really well and everything seems to be going great, and then it's just like flips on its head and everything's just a mess. Just like the nice quiet for a couple of weeks. Let's just stick with that. Let's not go crazy. Let's not ruin a good thing.
No, I totally agree with that. That you don't want somebody to bait and switch the holidays on you. So.
No, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Although they can be a really fun thing to talk about.
It can be a fun thing to talk about. And actually, the reason why I want to talk about the bait and switch style game is that I ran one successfully recently.
Ooh.
And so
Congratulations.
I thought it'd be fun to talk about it because it didn't totally piss off my players, which a bait and switch could do.
Yeah. There's a mighty fine line in a bait and switch game where you can either really, make a fantastic story that people talk about and enjoy, or just like ruin it for everyone. So
yes. And so I guess we're going to talk about a couple different versions of the bait and switch game. I see you have written here the genre switch, and that's effectively what I did. It's a genre switch, the entire thing.
I like genre switches. I think that they are enjoyable. And dear listener, for your information, a genre switch, it would be like if you're starting with a mystery and it goes full on horror, or if you've got an adventure game and suddenly your entire party is owning a nifty little cafe in town and has to like deal with all the hijinks of owning a cafe.
It's changing the whole concept of the game on its head. And this is why, again, you mentioned it's a fine line to toe. It really is, because if you go into the game predicated this is going to be a mystery game or an adventure game, and then you turn that into something else, it's a lot different than introducing like elements of other genres. It is like, well, now we are playing this style of game. And so it's it again, you got to toe the line cautiously.
Yeah. I mean, it might work easier if you start out by, say, having a nice little role-playing game about owning a cafe, and then it turns into a massive adventure, spanning the globe. And
that actually feels like more of a linear progression in terms of the hero's journey.
It does. Okay, so maybe not that way, but definitely like a murder mystery turns into an eldritch horror game. That is a very classic, nice genre switch, and it works really well because it can be very mundane, like low magic, low anything like that. It's just a standard, everyday Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot style murder mystery. And then eldritch gods, cults, demons, the works,
Yeah.
A lot of fun. I also like style switches. They're like theme, like so we were talking mystery into horror. Let's talk fantasy into, say, cyberpunk or sci-fi.
It's a far change.
Yeah. So in Cyberpunk, in sci-fi, your players could be in a video game. And it starts out and they don't know that, they're doing the fantasy world, they got the magic, the whatever, and then they got to log out and they're actually on a starship.
Like
it's a lot.
Sword Art Online, like you're playing the fantasy instead of.
And it can be, it can be very difficult to spring that on your players because they have to have then 2 sets of character sheets, or maybe it's just 1 set of character sheets, a la GURPS, where the skills sort of transcend. And that could, they're playing themselves in this fantasy game and they get a red alert and they've got to log out because their ship's under attack.
I could see that you could probably maintain the fantasy skills and just be very, again, this would be something that you'd have to plan like your session 0. Is that, do the fantasy skills and then, flip into the sci-fi thing and know how the players' things translate 1-to-1.
Yes. Don't take things away from the players that they've, sort of generated. It also works the other way around. I think a lot easier is sci-fi into swords and sorcery. I think if you've got, a sci-fi, flying around in spaceships, and then the spaceship, say, crashes onto a magical land, a la Futurama, I guess, and they've sort of got to switch out their blasters for bows and arrows and swords and stuff. That can be very interesting because you've got like high tech that they may have that fits almost like magic in this, medieval style world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can make that one work. I mean, you could even draw inspiration from like Star Ocean, which is like, high sci-fi being dragged into fantasy world. So it's not as difficult as you might think to make that switch.
No, and it can be a lot of fun. I remember Star Ocean. That's probably where I was thinking of coming up with this from. Another switch that is I don't know if it's more common or if it's just like it's the story switch. It's the adventure hook or the motivation switch. You've got the players think that they're the good guys and they've been doing the good thing for the good guys. They've been working with the good guys. Turns out, nope, they're not. It's the bad guys all along.
It's actually one that I think is a lot easier to do than a lot of people would think about, basically. I think that the player, the hook switch is there, the adventure hook switch. I think that's a lot simpler to do, and it doesn't feel like you've done as much. More or less, you're just kind of questioning the reality that the GM has imposed upon you.
Yes. And I think that one, if done right, is probably the one that people are going to remember the most. Genre switches are really good for like short to medium games. Like long term, if you're doing a style switch like this, it's got to be either early on or it's got to be frequent, because if you're talking about a major tonal shift in your story, it really has to fit that. An adventure hook switch is something that can happen at any point in your story, because you're not changing the functionality of the game. You're just changing how your players have viewed the story up to that point.
Yeah, I'd say fairly strongly that both the genre switch and the style switch have to happen. Like you said, in short games. I would completely agree with that, because in a style switch, like once you make the switch, you don't want to like invest them too heavily in fantasy and then switch them into the futuristic game. Now, if you could find a better way to kind of code switch between the two of them, that could be a very fun game. But and then the bait and switch works sort of like as the setup for that style of game. But if you're doing like, like the Star Ocean thing, once you lose the sci-fi angle, like which might be like 1 or 2 sessions, the rest of the game is a fantasy game, effectively. Or the other way around, the rest of the game is a, sci-fi game. And so, you don't want players to be stuck in that world they were thought they were going to play a fantasy game, for like this long chronicle. It's like, just kidding, we're not doing Fireflies. So,
well, I mean, okay, I've got an idea. If you had a fantasy game, and it's a long-term fantasy game, a mid-range, maybe a couple of months, and then your players wake up from cryo sleep. And that was something the computer was putting them all together to, enhance team dynamics before they get to their job site in space. And that could be interesting. That's just sort of like hey, you beat the final bad guy, good job. Now you're waking up from cryo sleep. But it would be sort of an epilogue and say, hey, maybe, I know we just did that whole fantasy game. You guys want to do a sci-fi game now? And that would be interesting. You could have the same characters and they know each other from the fantasy game, but they're not in the fantasy game anymore. That would be a different thing that still fit in the sort of a bait and switch, but in a very low stakes sort of way.
Yes. So why do we want to run a bait and switch game? Why would you ever want to pull the rug out from your play?
Well, I think if you're doing a good switch, you build up the story and then you pull the rug out, as you say, it can make that new part of the story hit so much harder if it's done right.
Yes, I agree with that. The challenge that I was facing with the original game idea, like the thing I switched into, was what I wanted to run from the start. But at the same time, my players are over preparers. And I didn't want them to over prepare for the situation that they were going to end up in. But I also didn't want them to go in completely blind. So it was basically like I prepared them for not a completely analogous situation, but something where they would probably be geared up to an extent, but they might be lackadaisical because they don't map 1-to-1. And so they made gearing choices and they, slimmed down on some things because the threat in the original section made it, much easier for me to pull them into the next section like unaware. And so they came in with, I would say, just the right amount of stuff to be able to tackle the new situation.
Yes. Fighting metagaming is like there's being an antagonistic game master, where you're actively fighting against your players, and there's being like more like this where you're using their metagaming not necessarily against them, but subverting their expectations so that they don't spend as much time gaming the system as they are enjoying the story. And that's very, I like that. I had put down that, certain styles, certain genres, certain characters will do better in those games. And, you might go into a game thinking this is the meta, this is the best character, I'm min-maxing for blah, blah, blah. And if you throw that character into a situation that they're not prepared for, well, then you're going to see your players pulling out all the stops. They're going to try harder. They're going to work better. They're going to think more, around what options they have rather than following the same thing that they always do. Right?
Yeah. I mean, again, you got to think about the bait and switch too, and that like if you're going to do it on the other end of this, the players have to feel like something was made fair to them. Otherwise, the game is already lost the moment that you do the bait and switch. Mm-hmm. So if it was, well, you didn't give me an opportunity to do XYZ, before the bait and switch, or I had no idea that this would be such an important skill ahead of the bait and switch. It's a tough thing to then, kind of retroactively go like, well, but yeah, that's the whole point of the game, and you just work around it, like, suck it up. But again,
that's why how you treat your players.
It's a it's not how you treat your players. It's a delicate line to toe. So like as you mentioned earlier, and as we're talking about now, and so the players will try harder if there is some air of fairness to it, which is trying to give your players. It's not like giving them the clue that, yes, I'm going to flip the game on you, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to be,
yeah,
I'm going to give you the opportunity to be prepared in a way without directly allowing you to prepare for it.
Well, we've talked about it before, where you want to set up times in any of your games, long-term games, short games, mid-term games, whatever it is. You want to give your players the opportunity to shine. And you want to sort of pace it out so everybody gets their opportunity to shine, to do the thing that they're good at. It's one of the reasons I don't like cookie cutter games so much. I like writing my own stuff. It gives a lot more freedom. This, if you're doing a genre switch, if you're doing a theme switch, or your players still have a set of tools that they've got, and they may be in a different sandbox, but that doesn't mean you can't still work with them. You can't give them opportunities to go out and do stuff, and you absolutely should, because if they're fish out of water, but they can still do something cool, that's going to be so much more exciting for your players, rather than, I already know this is cool because I've already done this. I've done this a million times. I know what I'm doing with this sort of character. You've always got that one guy that plays a specific character with a specific build because that's what he likes. But you put him in a situation where that's not normally effective, and give him the opportunity to, maybe utilize some of his secondary skills, but in a cool way. That's going to be a lot more interesting and something that they're going to remember a lot longer.
Yeah,
it's more fun.
Yes,
it's fun.
Yes. Again, it does give your players an opportunity to stretch themselves once they've ended up in the other genre, setting, whatever it might be. And again, perhaps you skillfully plan instead of prepping them early, you're giving them something at the transition to be like, this is how I'm going to help you cope with the situation, whether it be, a merchant that helps you buy a dagger or a gun, depending on your total genre switch, or, maybe it's a set of like, here's 5 skills that you can reallocate, now that I've switched you. And so the players have some, like, again, sense of that, like, okay, now I have more agency in this, even though I didn't get to choose, like, that this is what we're doing. In an adventure hook game, it's a lot less incumbent upon giving your players that, because the players sort of figure out your motive behind, why you're portraying X versus, like, this way, and why you're portraying Y this way. Like, your players can sort of suss that out because it's a story-based transition that's happening, and motivations within the characters themselves.
Yeah. So I was thinking that there's like really 3 places where you can do a genre switch. And I think each one of those you kind of want to set up differently. And my idea was, you can do it at the beginning, you can do it in the middle, or you can do it at the end. Right?
Those are the places.
Those are the 3 places, Aaron. No, and I mean, like, you don't do it like we're talking midpoint, we're talking exactly dead center. Okay, you've got one game before it and a different game at the end. the one at the beginning and the one at the end, they are really in that like introduction and just before the end. I think those are the good places to switch. You can't do like a 25-75 or a 75-25 or like 60-30 or anything like that. It's 50-50 and 10-90, 90-10.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, you gotta be committed to making the change very early, or right dead in the middle, like you said, or very late. And I feel like actually, if you go back to our styles, I think some fit better at the beginning. I think some can work in the middle, and I think there's only one that really works for the end.
Yeah, you can make a lot of them work at the end, but not well.
Yes, like they're gonna feel not good. Okay.
Yeah,
that's my summation of how they're going to feel. Perhaps I'm wrong. It's a what are you going to do about it? Like so at that point you got that far. What are you going to do? So.
Yeah. So let's talk about doing a switch early on in the game. Yes. Your 10% or just after your introduction. You got your first session or two, and then you switch the game, and it's a completely different game for the rest of the time. How do you make that work?
Well, I mean, like, so I could say that there's a lot of different ways you could do it. You could look at how you did your Cyberpunk game. That was a bait and switch. You started as characters, you purposely killed them off, and then you had them make the real characters. Okay.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things that worked really well for that was that definitely leaned hard into these are your characters. We're doing this. You've got a specific mission. You're doing well. Throwing things at them that they can work with. Introducing them to style and what's going on. It was very, very much the standard Cyberpunk mission. I tuned everything up as high as I could. I went crazy with the map. I made like a multi-level map with sound effects. Like it was 3 levels up and down. You click switches to open doors, and it like changed the lighting effects and had like a klaxon that went off. Like it was everything, right? Really going heavy into it. And then as soon as they got to that point where they were getting overwhelmed, killing characters off, I made the switch happen immediately. It was fast. It was hard. I stopped the game. I told them the switch was happening. They were all waking up with their new characters. And that was the end of the session. They came back the next week and started basically a new game in that world. And then slowly built the game back up from there. And I think that's really what you got to do with any sort of like switch at the beginning. So you got to take it to 11.
Yeah, and then, I agree. The first thing needs to be so crazy that like the second thing, you have time to build into it. One end of the spectrum to the other. I mean, again, I guess when we talked about the ending here, it could be that it's very slow building into a kind of crazy thing at the end. You could go from crazy to crazy. It's harder to digest what just happened necessarily if you go from crazy to crazy, because typically when you do the bait and switch, you want your players to go like, what? And they gotta take a moment to be like, okay, so now this is happening. Now this is what we're doing. Now this is how we're gonna be. Yada yada. So yeah, you do. There is that rebuilding period after you get started there. And a lot of like introductions at the beginning tend to be more high octane. So it's not out of the ordinary for a game to feel really highly tuned at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, there's a term for that. It's in media res, and that means to start in it. So if you're telling a sort of an action story or watching an action movie, there's usually think of any James Bond movie. It starts with an action sequence. And that then switches over into the actual movie. This is a very great way to set your players up for, this is the genre we're going to be doing, this is the style we're going to be going. And if you do that and then switch it into something else after that initial hit, that's going to like also really hit. You're starting in some craziness and then you're going to something different, but you need to have that point of adjustment. Your players need to adjust, and it's going to make the rest of the story like, you know, just have more oomph.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, again, it's anytime you do one of these situations, minus at the ending of a game, there is an adjustment period associated to it. And again, this is why I'm sort of alluding to why it doesn't work as well at the end of a game.
Well,
but again, you do you. So, so how do you make this type of change then in the middle of a game?
Well, I think with the middle or the end, there's a lot of foreshadowing you've got to do. And when we talk about foreshadowing, you talk about leaving breadcrumbs for the switch. And generally, you want to leave breadcrumbs that aren't obvious to your players until the switch happens. Like, they're obvious in retrospective.
Yes, I agree with that.
They should get hard. Yeah,
this is like the crux of like the scariest thing about being a GM is that you have to tell your players what's going on. You don't need to directly tell them what's going on, but you need to give them the clues, and you have to then say you're either going to understand what's going to happen, or when it happens, it will make sense. You can't be so ambiguous that when this situation were to happen in the middle of a game, the players are like, I had no idea that this was going to happen. I mean, like, not that they had no idea, but like, none of your clues made any sense.
Mm-hmm. This is also what I did in my Cyberpunk game. So we talked about the bait and switch at the beginning. They start out with one set of characters, and then they switched over to the other one. And the mission they were given at the beginning, after they woke up, was to go and track down the person that was responsible for the original crew's death. Right? Mm-hmm. And so over the course of a couple of months, they did various missions and did investigation and tracking. There was a street race. There was an event at a casino outside of town where not only did they gamble, but they also put on a live stage show. It's a whole thing. I was going crazy with the options in this game. There's just too many. And then finally, they find their way into basically the war zone of the city, fight their way in, reach the guy they think is responsible, and he turns it around and says, no, it's always been this AI directing you, and I'm trying to shut it down. It's the one that caused all this trouble, and here's what we have to do about it. And, you know, there is that, you know, you build to this major event. They're going to have the showdown, and an event happens that changes sort of your trajectory in the game. And then everything that happened up to that point, they would be getting messages from other players in the game, and the messages that were being interrupted, or the messages they were getting were being interrupted. They were being altered slightly. The information they would see in the news reports was weighted one side or the other, depending on what was going on, what they needed to hear. And when they got to this point in the game, they can look back at all this stuff and see, oh, this AI is controlling all the information that's coming out for whatever needs it has, you know, for various purposes. And I didn't do a great job with making my foreshadowing subtle. My players kind of already figured it out by the time they got to the guy.
Which is fine. Like that's
fine. That's good. you want them not to be like, what the hell do you mean? How does that work? Because then you're gonna have to fight with your players. Like, no, stop hitting the guy. That's your next quest giver.
Yeah. You don't want that's a really good one there. You don't want to have the players go to somebody who's supposed to help them, and they think he's the enemy because you didn't do a good job at showing all of the cards the players need to see to be able to connect those dots. Now they might still do it, okay, because your players are jerks, so they're just going to do that, okay?
Yeah.
Or they might still do it because your players just haven't been able to connect the dots, even though they're really obvious, whatever they might be. But it's better for your players to have been able to connect the dots. It's also good for your players, like, to connect some of the dots, but maybe not all of them. And so when the switch does happen there, you can look back and go like, oh, all those other things also contributed to it as well. Like, had I seen all of those, like, oh, hindsight's 2020, it makes sense, that something is happening or that this is what you're going to end up doing. So
yeah. They didn't even pick up, like, they picked up, I had thrown so much foreshadowing at them that they only picked up maybe half of what I gave them and sort of pieced it together with that. There were other parts after the story was over. I was like, this also meant that. Like, oh, yeah, that did. And this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And they're like, oh, yeah.
That's my favorite thing in a debrief is to be able to go through all the things that you missed and be like, what?
Also, you guys didn't follow up on any of these stories, and I wrote entire adventure over there, and you guys just skipped it. But that's fine. That's fine. I'll save it for another game. But that's part of over preparing for your sessions. Try not to, just like come up with the plan and roll with the punches. I think that if you're going to do a mid game switch, you've got this genre switch, you've got this style switch, whatever it is, then you really need to sort of tie things back. Like that foreshadowing, that those events that happen in the beginning of the game, you're giving them new context with your switch. Right?
Yeah.
And so that context, tying the things back to it, making things, the events going forward mean something because of the events beforehand, will let your players relate, but also feel like their actions up to this point weren't in vain.
Yes. Again, it comes down to that sense of fairness when you make the switch. Like, did anything I do prior to that matter or not? And if it didn't matter, then, it leaves your players in a bad spot. It's just like, great. So everything going forward probably doesn't matter. That's the message that you're sending to your players. And so you don't want it to feel like that when the switch happens. You want it to be like, oh, all of our accomplishments beforehand meant something now that we're in this new reality.
Yeah. And then, so you're saying you don't care for the bait and switch at the end, huh?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're going to give me a better example of it, but I'm just, I'm thinking of the, like the styles that we talked about, and I feel like that always leaves a sour taste. And actually, you have an example of like good bait and switches, and one of them is like the worst bait and switch that I've seen. So, like, and it happens at the end.
Yeah, it does.
And it's bad.
Oh yeah, but it's the one that anyway, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
So like just thinking about the examples, just think about that. Like, if you have to do a lot of foreshadowing coming into this, and I think the only thing that you really can bait and switch at the end of a game would really be, you can't like genre bait and switch, and you can't do like fantasy into cyberpunk. Like, that's craziness. I think the adventure hook works here. I just think the other two feel like boy, you're just shooting your players and being like, just nothing you did mattered.
The adventure hook is probably the best one at this point. It's the everything, you've been working for what you thought were the good guys up until the end. And then, you've had this big event, and it's in the aftermath of the big event that your players get whatever bit of information they were missing that puts all the pieces together. And if you're going to have a bait and switch that happens near the end of the game, you have to rely on your players to figure out that step. And because if you tell them it, if you push them into a bait and switch at the very end, it's going to feel bad. Your players are not going to like it. And I think that's the reason that the example that I have there is so bad. If they had done that in a more subtle way, so that the viewers of this were to put it together, rather than, I'm going to write the other one down. That's the better ending. That is the better version of the exact same thing. If your players figure it out, you've given them all the information, they're given the bits of pieces that sort of fit together with what's already been foreshadowed. They may already have some suspicions, but you lay it out for them in a way that they figure out, oh no, we've done the terrible thing. We've got to stop these people. And they make the decision that, the change has happened. Then you can have your massive blowout ending. When I said at the beginning, if the change is at the beginning, you have to have it like tune it to 11, go just absolute crazy, balls to the walls, fire up at everything. Yeah, that's the ending that you're looking for here. You've got to like tune it up. Your players, have like made a major victory for what they thought were the good guys. They find some information that leads them to think that they're not, and then they have to go ham, just like completely hog wild, and that is the end of the game. And that can be really fun, really exciting, and because your players figured it out, not because you fed them all the information they needed and laid it all out, and, nice color cards so they can, follow the direction that you've set for them, because they figured it out, and they figured it out on you, man. You guys got me. They can then revel in this massive blowout ending, and that's fun.
Yeah. No, again, I guess there's a place for this. It's
been done terribly so many times. And the example that we're talking about,
this is like the M. Night Shyamalan movie. Like, there's a twist. There's a twist.
I wrote down some examples of bait and switch, and the one that popped in my head for the end was The Village. The Village. Have you guys seen The Village? No, you haven't? Okay, but you have. Got it. At the end of The Village, and I'm going to spoil it because don't watch it. Is the entire movie is set in like this what do they call them? A pilgrim time. Like very old 1700s. They're living in a little village, and there's monsters in the woods and whatnot, and only the one girl who's blind can go out there because the monster can't see her. And they have to send her out to go get medicine. And she goes out into the woods, and it turns out it's not in the 1700s. It's in like modern times. There's just like families that have like, they don't like modern society, so they built a puritanical society and then didn't tell their children. And so like she goes and gets medicine from the security guard monitoring the site. It's so bad.
I recall this plot. I never saw the movie, but
yeah. This is one of the other things that you have to worry about with a bait and switch. You can do it once, you can do it twice. Don't do it every time.
Yes, this is a use extremely sparingly. This is like,
and you can have fun with it.
Yes.
If you do different bait and switches in the same game and bounce your characters around, they can expect the unexpected. But then, like, run a straight game a couple of times.
More than a couple of times. Run a straight game most of the time. Okay. Bait and switch, like, extremely sparingly. This is like, the spice a little goes a long way, so.
Break in case of emergency.
Yes.
It's really good. It's really fun. It can give your players a lot of that, excitement, like, I don't know what's coming next. And that in itself is very interesting. If you do it all the time, then your players expect the twist, which is the M. Night Shyamalan. Yes, you know who I'm talking about. Shyamalan. All of his movies have the switch, so you go in looking for it, and then there's no switch. Like
it loses its like luster at the end of it. You don't you know it's coming. And so now you're just looking at every turn for it. You've now broken the immersion into the game, and the game is more about trying to figure out, well, what is he going to do different? Where's like, what's the thing I'm not seeing here?
Yeah. So the good example that I had from this, that was the bad example. The good example version, I think, would be The Usual Suspects. I'm going to spoil the crap out of that movie too, apparently. This one I think you guys should watch if you haven't. But it's old and it's got Kevin Spacey, so, each to their own. But
it's nearly a 20-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it at this point.
But it's so good. There's a story, and there's a narrator. This guy is telling his story to the cops, right? And he's weaving this intricate tale talking about this mystery figure, Kaiser Sose. And just at the end, he leaves, and there's a montage of things that cut back and forth, sort of laying out but never telling you specifically, just showing you the information that everything you've heard up to this point has been a lie. That the narrator has just been pulling stuff out of his ass the entire time. And then you watch him walk down the street, and he transforms his gait, his style, the way he's holding himself, and you realize that he's been the bad guy the whole time. But it never, like, they may yell it out, like literally yell it out in the thing, but you don't need that. They could be completely silent at this point. You can just watch it and just see the physical transformation and the montage, and you could work it out yourself. And that's a sort of layout that you need to have for a switch at the end, where your players can put all the pieces together and sort of figure it out for themselves what has actually transpired. It gives new context to everything that has happened before and gives them a different way to go.
Yes. Again, it's kind of like the adventure hook switch and all that. So it again fits better at the end
than any of the other ones. You don't like. Yes, you could have a fantasy to sci-fi thing at the end, but only as like an epilogue. Like, hey, we're going to keep the same characters. We're going to play a different genre next week, sort of thing. And that's a different. That's less of a bait and switch and more of a hoping your players want to play a different genre with you on their next game.
Yeah, no, definitely. The one that I saw on your list here that was just
Oh, you didn't like a different one? I thought it was The Village because
no.
That's the one I would definitely think would be a bad one.
I mean that is a bad one. That's an example of a bad one. Again, I think The Village isn't The Village an M. Night Shyamalan movie?
Yeah, that's why we were talking about it.
Okay, yeah. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
The movie, not the TV show. I mean,
you're at the movie. I don't think I've ever seen the movie. I saw the TV show. I thought you were talking about the second to last season, and then the renewal for the last season.
No.
Horrific.
No. I'm talking about the whole concept of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The story, the pitch for Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a bait and switch. Okay, you're talking about your standard horror genre. The vampire, the monster tracks a blonde girl into an alleyway and murders her. But in this, it turns out that she was luring the monster in there so that she could murder the monster because she's a bigger badass. And that sort of bait and switch is very good for the beginning.
That's different.
Yeah. I knew what I was doing, man.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we're not talking about switching from the WB to the UPN. Whatever. We're talking about the concept of, pretty ditzy blonde girl gets tracked by monsters, and now she's actually the chosen one. And she destroys the monsters. That's the thing that I think is good for a bait and switch. You think that this person's going to die horribly? Nobody.
Yes.
And the last one I have on here, so I've got, this is another sort of Whedon sort of thing, was Cabin in the Woods.
I think I've seen this.
Cabin in the Woods is a horror movie, sort of. It is every horror movie. And the storyline of the Cabin in the Woods is that there's an institution that runs horror movies around the globe using real people and killing them off to appease the old gods. Okay, that's the twist that happens at the very beginning before you're introduced to the actual horror movie or see the title card. It's very weird. You should absolutely see this movie because Cabin in the Woods is just like your standard, group of college kids go out to a cabin in the woods and they accidentally summon demons and, like Evil Dead. But this is, what if the whole setup, because it's the same movie we've seen a billion times. What if it's that way because these are set up by some organization that is doing this as a ritual to stop the old gods from destroying the world? And so during the movie, it switches back and forth between the college kids in the cabin in the titular woods, and the underground society who are, monitoring it, placing bets on what dumb thing the kids are going to do, piping in hormones into the place so they make bad decisions. It's very much this, dual story going on. And from all of the trailers, from all of the original, it looked just like, this is just a normal horror movie. It's going to be a standard horror movie. And you get in there and it is anything but. And this is another one where near the end, the characters, the actual player characters basically, figure it out. And then they figure it out and they've got to make their way in and defeat the big bad, which is apparently Sigourney Weaver. So that's fun too. Like, you should watch Cabin in the Woods. And I mean that not not to our listeners. Yes, you should, listeners. But Aaron, you should watch Cabin in the Woods.
Okay. All right.
I think you'd like it.
Do you have anything else you want to add to the bait and switch topic?
I think we covered it. I think it's very good to, use this sparingly. But if you're going to, be careful with it. And like, if you follow a couple of things we said here, make sure that you pick the time when you're going to do it. Make sure that you foreshadow the change if it's going to happen anytime other than the very beginning of the game. Give your players time to adjust, or give them the tools to figure out that it's happened so that they can make the change themselves. You can have a lot of fun with it, and it can be a really powerful tool in your storytelling arsenal.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now I'm going to bait and switch us into our next topic. No, I'm just kidding. We're not doing that.
We're a music podcast now.
But if you have thoughts on the bait and switch game, let us know. levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. The podcast is on YouTube, so you can smash the like button there. Otherwise, subscribe to it, your favorite podcasting site, review it, recommend it to a friend, all those good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.